Ambassador Power used the words, and I quote, "the absolute imperative of seeking justice." In that spirit, we welcome back to the microphone our Symposium co-chair, Professor Irwin Cotler, the former Minister of Justice of Canada and the moderator of the panel, "The Holocaust, Genocide and Human Rights, Universal Lessons for the Preventing and Combating of Mass Atrocity in Our Time." Professor Cotler.
Thank you, Richard. I want to join you in commending Ambassador Samantha Power, the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, for her very moving and compelling message, for her evocative words of remembrance and reflection, and for her ongoing commitment to the pursuit of justice. As Richard mentioned, I want to welcome you to this panel now on the Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights, Universal Lessons for the Prevention and Combating of Genocide and Mass Atrocity in Our Time. We have a group of very distinguished panelists. I will introduce each in the order in which they will be speaking. And our first panelist is Robert Badinter, l'ancien ministre de la Justice de France, le président du Conseil d'État, a member of the French Senate, and a world leader in the struggle for the abolition of the death penalty. I first met Robert Badinter some 35 years ago when we served as co-counsel at The Hague in a mock trial then with respect to the imprisoned Soviet dissident Anatoly Sharansky. As a result of Robert's compelling advocacy, Sharansky was acquitted in that mock trial, but Robert's compelling advocacy has continued to secure freedom and liberation then and since. Robert?
Thank you. Yes, we are, as you can see, old friends. It's a little difficult for me. It's not my natural language. And I miss the fluency and delicacies of the French eloquence. But I shall act as if I were before an American audience somewhere in an American university. Why university? You have made a most beautiful speech. Not when you mentioned me. I thank you, my mother would have appreciated it, I can tell you that. But when you refer to the importance of the Nuremberg trial, and the few remarks, as the trial itself has been largely treated, I want to make, comes from a long, pessimistic view of the human beings and international politics. We speak about Nuremberg, and we speak about Nuremberg on both faces. One, the crime, 35. Then what follows, and at the end, the punishment. Crime et châtiment. This is a well-known masterpiece which has come into reality. So far as the crime is concerned, you should remember that the Statute of Nuremberg, the first one, written or at least corrected by Hitler himself, has been taken on the general reference, this is made for the protection of German blood and the protection of German honor. Adolf Hitler, 35. Anti-Semitism was not new. We Jews, all our history long, have been a suffering people, even before the catastrophe of Titus taking the temple occurred, even before. When you look at history, I would summarize it in 3 words. Now maybe a 4th one should be added. But the 3 words are, you have had the religious anti-Semitism, which has lasted for centuries because Jews were considered by Christians as being Jesus Christ murderer. Nous sommes le peuple déicide. We were accused of having killed through the Son also the Father. I don't have to remind you what price has been suffered by Jews for that extravagant accusation for centuries. Then came a second time of anti-Semitism when La Raison took the light's power. At that time, when the concept of nation arose, after in Europe the conflicts due to the French Revolution and the Napoleonic enterprise, when the nation really built as such in Europe, what happened? The Jews were considered as belonging not to one nation, but to all nations, or at least to most of the nations in Europe. And therefore, they were evidently not citizens, they were evidently, they belong to a one spread nation, which names was not pronounced at the time, but that meant that there were foreigners everywhere. And they belonged to a strange people coming from Asia, as said afterwards, a strange people with branches everywhere. And that's where the myth came of the Jewish international power and the Jewish complot against the whole world to control it. I don't have to remind you what were the results of that approach, but it took the end of the 19th century to come to the third and the worst form of anti-Semitism, the one that you cannot escape, and the one which inspires these 2 sentences by Hitler, the racial anti-Semitism, from at the origin the religious anti-Semitism, you have passed to the national anti-Semitism, Jews being foreigners everywhere, and at the third, racial anti-Semitism. Jews belong to a different race, a different species, and therefore, coming from a race which has all the genetic characters of dégénérescence, one should take measures to protect its people against this racial threat. That's where the delirium, which took off the Nazi, starts. And you know they have been searching from the beginning to Mengele to find out what would be the characteristics of this race. It's not enough to say they are a race. Why? They searched, they couldn't find. And the Nuremberg Statute is so interesting in many ways. I'm speaking there of the intellectual, not the emotional aspect. Why? Because in order to qualify the Jews, as you cannot find any signs of specificity in the Jewish people or persons, at the very end, you tie it to the religion. You are a Jew because your grandfather was Jewish. You are a Jew because your grandmother was Jewish, and furthermore, you have married a Jew, or you are practicing the Jewish religion. So that at the very end, it's the religion which comes back and makes the circle perfect. There will, or there is, I shall not say it, I belong to the generation which has lived through the Holocaust. To me, it's no teaching from the age of 12 to the age of 16, and you become very, very quickly a man in those circumstances. I've lived in France occupied by the Nazis. So I know all about the evilness of Nazism, and when I go to Auschwitz, it's a family grave. So many of my parents are there. Not my father, he was sent to Sobibor. So and this is only a remembrance I make. Why have I always thought? Why? Fortunately, I obtained a fellowship to go to Columbia University, where I landed in 1949, and then I had the privilege of being taught about Nazism in a closed seminar held by Professor Lazarsfeld, who was a very famous sociologist at that time, coming from the Berlin University, and obviously Jewish. And in that seminar, the war had just finished. It was 3 years afterwards. He explained to us all the mechanism of the German Nazi control of Germany. And what is unforgettable for me, and it's not clearly perceived now, is that the extraordinary thing about the Holocaust, it's not the fact that Jews were killed according to modern techniques. Jews have been massacred all along European history. They have been burned, they have been put in jail, they have been tortured, they have been raped, they have been threatened if they didn't change religion to die, and their children. We have a long relationship with suffering in the worst ways. But what makes the Holocaust special is the fact that among all nations, Germany in the 20s was, in Europe, probably the most cultured, the most educated, the winner of the greatest number of Nobel Prizes. Among there, quite a few Jews, but so was Germany. The children were raised in the love of art and music. What remained of that when Hitler appeared? What remained of the greatest philosopher of Europe, if not the world, who was the rector of Heidelberg University and who turned out to be a Nazi very quickly. What happened with the greatest jurist, probably the most important philosopher of law of the early 20th century, Carl Schmitt? He became the head of the Nazi jurist, which proves, as I always say to my students, it's not enough to be a good jurist. You still, this is, you know, the rabbi's word. It's not enough to be a learner. You have to be a mensch. In Yiddish, you have to be a mensch. Schmitt was indeed a great thinker, but he was no man, because he didn't belong to all mankind. But his word was, we, the Jews, were not human beings as the other, and from the teaching of the great Schmitt to the Nuremberg statute by Hitler, continuity more than breakdown. For that, and that cannot be denied, I remember discussing this matter in UNESCO. From that comes for us, not only for Jews, but for all mankind, a permanent question. What can stop racial hate, anti-Semitism, racism, when you look to what happened to the most educated Western people in the civilization of the time, which means clearly, and it's terrible to say, but I saw it. My own professor was before this, in the tribunal in Savoy, was immediately after the liberation, sentenced to death. He was a professor of philosophy, and he was a fascist, an active fascist. So, teaching, learning, thinking, writing, composing, yes. But when there comes the time when there is the call for mass murder, how many resist? And that's where Lazarsfeld explains us how Hitler brought his funest magic in the German people. But the fact is that it happened. And it lasted till the end. And they fought for him till the end. And then they realized, but too late. Too late for the world. Too late for the Germans. Too late, much too late for the Jews. So that lesson should be kept in mind, because it's a very pessimistic lesson. That means that even education at the highest level, culture at the highest level, music at its best, art, are not protections sufficient to fight against, or victoriously, against racism and anti-Semitism. That's the first personal pessimistic remark, but I hope you will think about it, that I wanted to make. The second one is not optimistic either. Don't think that I'm the Rastenic person. No, 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 no. When I was at Columbia in those young days, my fellow students used to call me, Bob, joie de vivre. It was nice, coming from where I was coming, but as such. The second remark is this. We speak after the crime, punishment of justice. First of all, there have always been questions about the Nuremberg trial. For Stalin, it was simple. What the hell, right word for him, what the hell do we want to do? We just draft a list of the criminals and we shot them as we arrest them. Why wasting our time if they don't confess their crimes? And I don't hope said Stalin that they would do so, the best is to shoot them once identified. Churchill, great statesman and certainly the best writer of the group, was not too keen either on the trial, because he said, well, lawyers will exploit the situation, it will become a tribune, many things we have heard about international tribunals. But Roosevelt, and behind Roosevelt, not only Jackson, but the great Frankfurter, wanted a trial. They wanted a trial not only because they trust the strength of law, but because rightly they say, we must take the evidence, control them, discuss them, publish them, so that they remain in history. Otherwise, in 20 years from now, all the crooks, intellectual crooks, will come and explain, no, that's not how it happened. So it's the search and the control of the judiciary on the truth and the evidence collected, which were considered as a major aim. And thanks to them, this has been the most positive result of the Nuremberg. The usual statement, you cannot be the winner and judge with objectivity the loser. This is a comedy of justice. On one point, it's true. We should always remember that the Katyn, the Polish officers shot by the Russians on the special orders of Stalin, the Katyn massacre was imputed to the Germans. It was, in fact, a crime committed by the Soviets, but there was a Soviet judge, and Stalin was one of the winners of the greatest size. So we still have that in the Nuremberg trial. But altogether, it remains a stand. But afterwards, friends, afterwards, did international justice blossom? We, lawyers, professors, judges, constitutional court members, did we have the time of happiness where we saw everybody saying, when it's crime, major genocide, crime versus humanity, war, etc., justice, international justice now rises and sentences? Pure dream. I've spent, about 30 years. So many of us have spent in, I must say, very scientific confrontation of views on what would be the best proceedings and the best ways of making up international justice. Intellectually, it was superb. But politically, what happened? Nothing. Nothing. Till the Cold War ended. If it were not for the Cold War, I'm very dubious about the coming up de la Cour Pénale Internationale and of the two other special tribunals for the Rwanda and Yugoslavia who came out at that time. If I say that, it's because, like some here, I've been profoundly involved in that period and the fighting. And I can tell you that in Rome, when the Treaty of Rome was prepared, discussed, the American representative at dinner time, charming fellow, told us, fellows, it's most interesting, but the United States will never sign the Treaty of Rome. Don't have any illusion. We like the idea that it can be used by the Council of Security, but we shall never sign it. The Senate will never sign the Treaty of Rome. And I raised the question, Was he wrong? Was his prediction false? Did the United States sign, the greatest power in the world, the Treaty of Rome, building the court? Instead, what the United States Congress, Senate, has made is the famous La Haye Act, by which the president can, or even I think should, order the American military forces to free any American citizen who would be brought by the International Tribunal in the jails of La Haye. La Haye, may I say, is not exactly Dachau nor Auschwitz. La Haye is the capital of the international law. But it's amazing. Why? It's another question. But the fact is, and that's why let's not be exhilarated by the progress made. Why? Not only the United States, but Russia, but India, but China. I take the largest power in the world. They never sign. They don't belong to the International Tribunal. Sign is made. That improvisation takes me out of time. So I dedicate to you to clarify this matter. Why do we celebrate so much the International Criminal Court instead of giving to the International Criminal Court or any other international jurisdiction the legal and the material means it needs so badly? That day I shall believe in the word international justice.
Robert, cher ami, je voudrais vous remercier pour votre témoignage. I want to commend Robert Badinter for his eloquent testimony, delivered not in his native tongue, because had you heard it in French, it would have resonated with the cultural music as he speaks. But a wonderful testimony. Robert, you reminded us of two things. The first, la trahison des clercs, the betrayal of the elites in the Nazi Holocaust, the betrayal in particular of the legal elites, of the roles of judges and lawyers in the perpetration of injustice. And the second thing is you reminded us the importance of the search for truth as the path towards the pursuit of justice. Merci, Robert.